In 1989, in Uncanny X-Men issue 248, Storm, a longtime member of the X-Men going back to 1975, is accidentally killed by Havoc. And it's very sad. Everyone cries, except we have read superhero comic books before. We know that this death is not going to stick, and the creative team knew that we were not going to fall for that. So just a few issues later, in issue 253, we see that Storm is still alive, except that now she's a little kid. And over the next few issues, over about a year, we start getting bits and pieces of information about what happened to Storm. In issue 257, we find out Storm does not have any memories of her time with the X-Men. She believes that she's still in Cairo, Egypt, when actually she's in Cairo, Illinois. And then eventually she meets Gambit, and then eventually in issue 267, she finds out that the Storm that Havoc believed that he had killed was actually a life model decoy that was programmed by the nanny, who had turned the real Storm into a child. And it's here that Storm actually gets her memories back, but she's still stuck in the body of a young girl. And then, just a couple of issues later, in issue 270, the Extinction Agenda starts. And at this point, the X-Men, X-Factor, and the New Mutants, they have all basically joined forces and are all kind of working out of the old Xavier Institute, or the remains of the Xavier Institute. And Storm and a couple of the New Mutants are captured by magistrates who are working for the Genosian government. And it's in this storyline that eventually Storm is re-aged into an adult and has full control of her abilities. Over the course of this time where she was stuck in the form of a young child, she had limited control of her abilities. Sometimes she couldn't use her abilities at all. So she met Gambit in issue 266, and she was trying to become more of a thief, relying more on her skills as a thief when she had to, because she couldn't rely on her abilities. But starting in issue 272, she is back in her adult body, and everything is back to normal for Storm. And so the point of this video is, I think it would have been interesting if Storm never did become an adult, or at least if they waited a few more years before turning her back into an adult. Around this time, the tail end of Chris Claremont's run on the X-Men that had been going for 16 years, you saw a whole lot of the people behind the scenes trying to restore the status quo. Let's get Professor Xavier back in the wheelchair. Let's get him back in charge of the X-Men. For a year or two, the X-Men had been scattered all over the planet. Some of them didn't even know that the others were still alive. Wolverine, Jubilee, and Psylocke there in Madripoor doing their own thing. Banshee and Forge are teaming up with Jean Grey, doing their own thing. Storm is over here with no memory of the X-Men. We've got to get them all back together. They're all living at the mansion now. We kill off some of the biggest X-Men villains of all time towards the very end of Claremont's run, with the Shadow King and Magneto being killed off, clearing the board for new villains that the new creators on the X-Men books, like Jim Lee and Willis Portacio and Scott Lobdell, that they are going to bring to the X-Men books after Chris Claremont leaves. And so they wanted to restore the status quo to something a little more familiar to longtime fans. The X-Men living at the mansion with Professor Xavier as their leader. And so I see why they wanted to turn Storm back into an adult with full control of her abilities. But I'm thinking that the story possibilities here would have been much more interesting if Storm had remained a child, if she didn't get turned back into an adult in the Extinction Agenda. Imagine if Storm is back with the X-Men, all the X-Men are reunited under Professor Xavier's leadership. Storm has been the leader of the X-Men for a few years now. It was around 1985 that X-Factor started, and that's when Cyclops went and joined his old friends, the original X-Men, and formed a new team. So Storm has been the de facto leader of the X-Men for a while now, and now she's a little kid. She's like 13 years old, and she barely has any control of her abilities. She still remembers everything that's happened to her. She still has her memories, but she can barely even throw a lightning bolt. And so now she has to concede that, yeah, Cyclops, you're probably better suited to lead the X-Men now. I have to learn to retrain and use my powers and learn how to use my powers. And so she is probably not going to be going on a whole lot of missions with the X-Men unless it's like a dire emergency, like in the first 3 issues of Adjectiveless X-Men, where half the X-Men were brainwashed by Magneto to join him. In that case, young Storm would probably be going with the team that's sent to rescue their brainwashed teammates, because we need all hands on deck with this one, even even if Storm might not be able to use her abilities, we still need her help here. But most of the time, she would probably be staying at the Institute, practicing in the Danger Room, trying to relearn her abilities. And then maybe eventually, by the time you get to Generation X starting, this would have been 93, 94, you could say that Storm becomes one of the students at the Massachusetts Academy. Again, she has all of her memories of her time with the X-Men, and mentally, she is an adult, but physically, she's a young teenager, and her powers are very unstable, and she needs to learn how to control her abilities. And so maybe she thinks that going with people who also are having trouble with their powers and is still very new to them, that might actually help her, and then she might be able to help them in some way. And of course, you would have a little bit of resentment from some of the members of Generation X. Jubilee, she thought that she was too good to be with these other guys who hadn't been hanging out with the X-Men for a while. Storm secretly might also kind of feel the same way. I'm an actual X-Man, but I'm going over here with these kids who haven't even gone into battle once. So she might feel a little resentment, and they might feel resentment towards her because she has gone out into battle loads of times, and she might say, well, when I was leading the X-Men, we did it this way, and they may all be rolling their eyes like, yeah, we get it, you're an X-Man. There's loads of stuff that you could do here. The romantic possibilities would be interesting to explore, although I wouldn't want to see them go too far in this direction because of the weirdness factor. You had Storm and Forge, who had been in a relationship going back to the life-death issue, and then that had kind of been put on hold when all of the X-Men were scattered all over the planet. In the actual X-Men comics, shortly into the Jim Lee, Willis Portacio stuff that followed Chris Claremont leaving the books, Forge proposed to Storm, and then he changed his mind because a conversation with Jean Grey led Forge to believe that Storm didn't really love him. And I think it could have been interesting if Storm and Forge still love each other, but Forge is like, oh, no, you're a kid now. I can't, no, go away. And so Storm is like, yeah, I like Forge, but, you know, with me being the way I am, we kind of have to put that on hold. And then she goes and joins Generation X, and then maybe some of the members of Generation X, like Skin and Sync, maybe they have a thing for Storm. And she's like, ooh, no, gross, you're just a kid. And they're like, yeah, but so are you. And she's like, no, ew, no. And that'd be interesting to at least play around with a little bit, although again, I wouldn't want them to go too far in that direction because, again, gross. Eventually, of course, you could turn Storm back into an adult, and you probably would want to. By this point, she would have been a kid or trapped in a kid's body for like 5 or 6 years, and so people would probably be getting tired of it. They miss adult Storm, but I'm just looking at everything that happened to Storm in the 1990s, where she's with the X-Men. She and Cyclops are both very veteran leaders by this point. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense that both of them would be leading the X-Men. I get it. We had the blue team and the gold team, but it seems like with the two of them, the way they kind of butted heads with each other around the time when they dueled each other for the right to lead the X-Men, it seems like there would be more of that going on again. So I feel like the story potential here for Storm being stuck in the body of a child would have been more interesting than turning her back into an adult, and then Forge leaves her after he proposes to her, and then she's just kind of with the X-Men, and that's her thing. I think it would have been more interesting if we saw her for a few more years stuck in the body of a child. So that's about all that I have here. What do you guys think? Would this have been interesting, or are you glad that they did away with this subplot whenever they did? Let me know in the comments below, and in the meantime, I will see you guys in the future. Have a good one.